Welcome back to the Caucus Room on Valor. This is where we do our remote episodes, our more topical episodes, and we can talk to guests from all over the world without them having to come and join me here in the Caucus Room. I'm your chairman, Don Calloway, and I got two true OGs with me here today. Both of them just happen to be based in Birmingham, one of my favorite places, one of my homes away from home, and I'm going to get right into it with these guys. Ryan Nave, the great RL Nave, originally from U City, St. Louis, veteran Southern journalist, sportsman, Renaissance man, intellectual, dedicated to the actual craft of real life journalism, and specifically dedicated to following topics surrounding the South and blacks and the Black South. So I am a Southern Negro. Ryan is my kind of guy. We go way, way, way back
Way
to the
back.
old country, University of Missouri, late 90s. And is my guy, and he's done amazing work as a journalist in Mississippi, now in Alabama, and all over the world. Joining him and I is my guy, Iva Williams, legendary Alabama politico, Southern fixer, man behind the scenes, veteran of all kind of campaigns, every level from presidential to dog catcher, Calhoun County, and every level in between. Roll Tide, Alabama superfan, host of the Intravenous podcast on the Birmingham Radio Network. Just a true supporter of Pine Street and all of your emerging politicians in this new wave of Southern leadership. He's your guy. I don't talk about politics in the South without talking to Iva Williams. So welcome, Ryan. Welcome, Iva.
Thank you, sir. Good to meet you, Iva.
Good to meet you too, brother.
Both based in Birmingham. I didn't even know.
Well, I've heard Ryan's name, of course. I mean, he's famous, but you know.
Right.
I'm just a simple country journalist.
Yeah. The modesty.
Let's get to that. So, Ryan, you were immediately and most recently writing for a publication called Wreckin' News, and Wreckin' going through some immediate transition. I loved it because for the last 5 years now, y'all have been dedicated to the South and the politics of the South, and you were at the leader of that. But the organization is transitioning a bit. Talk about what the Wreckin' was and what Wreckin' Black Joy is going to continue to be.
Yeah, so Reckon as a company actually predates me. It's been around since 2017. It started as part of the AL.com newsroom and really kind of came into prominence during the Doug Jones, Roy Moore Senate race, and grew a vast loyal following in Birmingham and across Alabama. Really made the company say, "Hey, this thing might be something bigger." What can it be? What should it be? Is it social video? Is it politics? Is it investigative? And what came out of that process was a newsroom for young Southerners. So I was hired in 2020 to build out Reckon 2.0 or Reckon South. And so that started with the core team here in Birmingham and Alabama, started hiring folks in Tennessee, Georgia, Louisiana. Soon we were drawing audience from all over the country, and that kind of made the company take another step back and say, maybe there's a national audience for this work. And so we always held on to the Reckon tradition of, how do you cover movements in America, which are born in the South? How do you cover organizing in America, which the South taught America to do? But instead of just focusing those stories on the South, we were doing stories and hiring staff from coast to coast. So we had folks from LA to DC and New York and in the Midwest, and still a lot of folks in the South. Media is a hard business, as we're all seeing here lately and in the last few years. And so the company, after about 5 years of Reckon being part of its strategic plan, decided to wind down that investment, close Reckon, cease publication, of Record News, but there was a body of work that we started that was really started by a young Black woman who was a beat reporter in Alabama called Black Joy. She was a night cops reporter, and she would show up to do a story. They said, "Why do we only see you when something bad happens?" So her name's Star Dunnigan. She just decided that Black Joy was going to become her beat, and she was going to cover Black Joy as an act of resistance. We developed it into a newsletter. It became the largest, fastest growing newsletter in the company. We believe that it can be a standalone business. And so even with Reckon going away, there was some interest in retaining the Black Joy body of work and moving it under different leadership in New Jersey to really try to figure out how to continue to grow that as a product, as an audience, as a brand, because everything we've been seeing for the last 2-3 weeks, last 2-3 months since the election has demonstrated the importance of that body of work and how important Black Joy is to everybody. So I'm glad that is continuing.
Good deal. Thanks for the breakdown, man. Listen, I really wanted to ask both of you all, and I've been thinking about having y'all on together for months now, just as prominent scholars, observers, and practitioners of the political Black South. I wanted to kind of examine this question. Have Democrats lost the South forever? Like, can we actually concede that it's over? Like, it has functionally been over since at least 2000, but obviously before that. But I gotta ask y'all, there's such like bigger questions in this kind of 3 weeks post-Trump term 2 universe. I don't even know where to start, but I will start here. Iva, as a good Southern conservative independent who may or may not be a Democrat anymore, Iva,
It's so fun. Like nobody takes me seriously.
yeah, I mean, but you're Alabama black man, right? Who's interested in politics. Maybe you're a Democrat, I don't know, right? And I think
No, not at all. Not at all.
you are not a Democrat at all. Is that what you're saying?
No, 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 not at all. I'm
Okay, so tell
a
me how you
card
identify.
carrying Republican.
Iva Williams, card carrying Republican, proud black man who has been in the mix. And like I met you on the Randall race, right? So you were deeply
Right.
invested in black politics and in the Southern politics. You ain't no Byron Donalds, right? You ain't Tim Scott. You know what I mean? So like is is there any hope whatsoever when you look at leaders like Randall, when you look at, the young readers of the Reckon that the Reckon was going for? Is there any hope for a Democratic Party and organized Democratic Party victories in the state of Alabama, or really throughout the South, that we can come back? We as in Democrats can have a path back.
Well, let me say this. It's easy to be an Alabama Republican. It's not as easy to be a national Republican.
Yeah.
So, that's where you see me kind of differ in my politics a little bit. Here in the state of Alabama, we have a supermajority in our state legislature. And at my age, 55, well, I guess I've been a terrible Democrat for a long, long time, but definitely in my 50s, I started looking at the two platforms. I looked at what was beneficial to me as an entrepreneur. I looked at the social politics, and that's when I really decided that I wanted to make a distinct change in my party affiliation. Now, that being said, I voted for Kamala Harris, our former vice president, very proudly. I supported her. If you'll remember, I was the one supporting her when she was initially running for president.
In 2000.
Um, yeah, so going back to your independent label, I do consider myself someone that votes for the individual. It's nothing for me to go back and forth on my voting ballot. Now, with that being said, no, I don't think so. I don't think that Democrats have a future in the South. I think that you have pockets like Birmingham. You have big pockets like Atlanta. Um, I don't know. I really couldn't tell you what's going on in Nashville, but um, I don't really see, personally, reading the tea leaves, Democrats making much of a comeback in statewide elections in the southern states. I think that it's unfortunate because we get into a situation where the redder it is, the or I would say on any side, if you were to look at a red state or a blue state, I think competitive states give us competitive candidates who yield more moderate thought processes. And when you have a state that is ruby red, as they call it, or I don't know the term for blue, we
Mm.
call them yellow dog Democrats down here. Democrats that vote for a yellow dog before they would vote for a Republican. But the more polar our parties get, I think the voter tends to get the bad end, the worst end of the stick.
Mm. Yeah. Ryan, where did we lose? Where did we lose the South? If you agree with Iva that it's gone for good, I mean, we're old enough to have watched it go in our like adult lifetimes. Where did obviously going back to '64, we've lost the South for a generation, right? But like, what happened? What happened that it just became not only lost but fundamentally out of reach for Democrats?
Um, so I like to think about this question a couple of different ways. So if we're talking about whether or not Democrats can win a statewide election in a southern state, or elect a Democratic president, I think there's a math question there that is very, very hard for Democrats, because these places are ruby red, but they're also ruby white, right? And we know, or whatever.
Lily,
I Lily white, ice
Lily
white,
White.
whatever. And we know that in the South, party affiliation tracks closer to race than anywhere in the country. And so if you look at a place like Mississippi, where black voter turnout actually surpasses white turnout, if you get to 100% of BVAP, right? Like you don't need 100% of white votes to elect a Republican governor, senator, and the other three congressional districts. The other thing I say is that the South is home to more elected Black Democrats than anywhere in the South, anywhere in the country,
country, yeah.
right? And so this idea that Democrats have a losing message, that this narrative that Democrats are the bad news bears and perpetual losers, like the numbers don't actually bear that out. But as you and I have talked about over the years, there is a ceiling on that. And so the highest you can rise, as a Democrat in the South, especially as a Black Democrat in the South, is the mayor of a large southern city, right? And so Randall ain't got nowhere to go after he finishes being mayor of Birmingham.
Well, it depends on do you value the mayor seat or the black congressional seat, which we just got a new one in Alabama, and Shamari is up here. So it's like those are
Exactly.
the equidistant, those are the equals, right, that are available. Is the
But
black
the other thing,
and a mayor
yeah,
seat.
but I think the other important thing to remember is that like these mayor seats are enormously powerful,
Yeah.
right? They oversee budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
right? And so if I'm advising Democrats, and again, I'm just a journalist. I'm not a strategist. I'm not a political expert. If I'm advising Democrats, I'm saying like use what you got, right? And so we can talk about dysfunction in state Democratic parties in Mississippi and Alabama and Texas, and Georgia, but Terry Sewell didn't need a functioning Alabama Democratic Party to get reelected time and time again.
Right.
Benny Thompson don't need a functioning Mississippi Democratic Party or National Democratic Party to keep getting elected over and over again. And what we see is the fact that like these mayor's offices and these congressional offices, a lot of times like do become the de facto Democratic Party apparatus in a state. I actually don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I never thought about it like that. So like, but it fully tracks. Like Iva and I meet in 2017, working Mayor Bay, Randall's first campaign in Birmingham. And actually, to
I
your
haven't heard
point,
that in a long time.
yeah, man. To your point, twofold. Number one, we met and he ran as part of the immediate phase 1.0 post-Trump resistance, right? Let's focus on these cities. Let's flex where we can. Blue islands in the middle of these red oceans. And let's run a progressive administration showing that this is where we can have some power and flex it. And Randall was like 1.0 of that. But to your point about the mayor's organization being the de facto Democratic organization, like Randall's organization, led by Iva and others, that's Doug Jones's infrastructure. That is effectively that, and Randall doesn't identify. Excuse me, Iva doesn't identify as a Democrat. Yes, but Randall's org, which Iva's a leader of, you don't win an election or you don't even compete in the state without something that looks like Randall's org right now. There's new kids who've come into the mix now, but I don't think that folks realize that Quentin is extremely important in Kansas City because he is the head of a political organization, which is the de facto most powerful Democratic organization in the state of Missouri, right? And that's a fascinating point you made for a brother who's not a strategist. Right?
I'll take it a step further and say there's so much young progressive energy in these places. They don't, because there is no party infrastructure. They end up either like they end up in DC or New York or like working campaigns as kind of journey folks around the country. They're doing important work in the advocacy space, but like the people who can do the work to, I mean, if the goal is to elect a Democratic Party official, or if the goal is to elect somebody whose values align with progressive voters in the South, I think the talent is here. But the infrastructure, to our point, looks different than it's looked in the past. And I think the mistake that Democrats are trying to make is saying like, oh man, like look at how well put together the Republican apparatus is. We should try to copy that. And it's just like, nah, they just got all the money.
Well, can I say that like, yes, the Republicans of that time were extraordinarily and vehemently racist, but I'm going to say, because I own the caucus room, I mean, direct line to a major failure by Barack Obama. Barack Obama, instead of empowering state parties in 2009, right, post his win, instead of doing what Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter, rest his soul, and other Democratic, power brokers have done, and use your celebrity to fund and empower the state Democratic parties, Barack Obama created and directed that energy to OFA, Organizing for America.
He's from Chicago, baby. What you expect?
It's his own political organization. Let's be clear.
He's a machine guy. That's all he knows.
He created his own national, extremely potent machine, but it was to the direct detriment of state parties. Yes, we would have gotten beat pretty badly in 2010 as a knee-jerk reaction to the racism of him being president, but it would not have been generational wipeout that took out thousands of seats in state legislatures if he had leveraged his celebrity to empower existing state parties as opposed to empower OFA. And I don't know that politically, particularly in the South, we will ever recover from that. Like
Let
people
me
don't
throw
remember. Like
something in there.
I'm gonna get you in here. People don't remember
Yeah.
Mississippi, Alabama. These states flip in 2010. That's in our lifetime. You know what I'm saying? And we act like they've been gone forever. All right, Iva, that's my rant. But yes, I'm blaming you, Barack Obama, straight up.
And I am agreeing 100% with that assessment. You take pre Barack Obama, we had some strong Democrats running for governor here in the state of Alabama. At that time, and mind you, you know, you guys throwing around the word progressive and conservative. Well, that kind of shifts in the state of Alabama, right?
Mm,
Progressive here isn't progressive nationally, right?
that's fair. That's fair.
'Cause-
But it's
You
still
know what I
Democrat,
mean?
right? It's still somebody who
But
would push
still,
deep. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And so where I'm going with this is before Barack Obama, we had Democratic. Our last Democratic governor was Don Siegelman, but we had some strong candidates all the way through the mayor of Tuscaloosa in Walt Maddox.
Yeah. Yeah. Solid.
Now, no Democrat runs for governor. I can tell you vehemently,
Right.
Randall Woodfin will never run for the governor of the state of
Well, and you
Alabama.
know what? That's actually something that. Oh, we finna spray the block today.
And so it's like, going to Ryan's point, and your point, you top out at mayor of a large city in the South
Yeah.
or the congressional seat.
Yeah.
And if you are not one who wants to be in the legislative side of government and you want to be in the executive, that's about as high as you're going to get. And I say that as my opinion.
Yeah. That's fair. No, I think that's fair. But I actually have a lot of respect for the Randalls of the world for not running for governor just to be the most famous man in the state for 6 months, right?
That's right.
You see a lot of that, and these are the guys that call and ask for money, and they end up on your text threads. But I really don't like. There's no path to win here. Why are you doing that?
Right.
Right? And I would almost rather prefer just leaving the thing empty rather than having people like marshal resources and asking my grandmama to give you $15 a week when she don't got it,
She
right?
got it.
She don't got it. It's a real thing, and you have no real shot to win. I do not like that. I'm not gonna call nobody names out here right now, but I do not like that, and y'all know who y'all is.
But I mean, do you think that there is value? Because again, I mean, like there's an infrastructure problem, there is a kind of talent and brain drain problem. Um, I mean, is there value in that exercise as an exercise in failing fast? Right?
Yeah,
Like, no, you're not going to get to the mountaintop, right? But in Democrats' pursuit of statewide office, there's so much that they don't know, and so in some ways, like somebody has to drive the train just to figure out, when we do get some resources, like but
to do
but
it.
that's a tall order, right? To ask
It's a
somebody to
tall order.
be
Tall order.
a sacrificial.
I will say this: we are old enough to remember my partner Bob Russell. He's a lobbyist out here in D.C., but he came up as staff for the Pryor family, right? So old school Governor Pryor, who just passed. I think his son David, no, his son Mark was a senator. He's a Pryor guy, right? And Bob Russell was Mark Pryor's chief of staff in the United States Senate, right? Which extraordinarily powerful position out here in D.C. And Mark Pryor, Arkansas. In 2008, Mark Pryor and his chief of staff, my boy Bob Russell, sat in the Arkansas state legislature holding their breath, and the filing deadline passed, and nobody ran against Democrat Mark Pryor in Arkansas for Senate. Nobody filed, right? But 6 years later, 2014, Tom Cotton, the race is done by 7 p.m. Eastern, right? So like, this is a couple things here. Number one, in our lifetime, we still had the South to the extent where in Arkansas they weren't even fielding candidates. Republicans did not field a Senate candidate. But number two, like, Republicans had the sense to not waste the money. If they saw the numbers, right, and the mathematics of it all wouldn't allow for a victory. I'm not going to raise $100 million from working class citizens to push something that we know we can't succeed at, right?
And if you go back, if you look at history, when the Republicans started flipping states, they did so in their state legislature. They literally did it one seat, one district, one state seat at a time. And so I think when we look across, I'm sorry, but I would just say Georgia is the best example, in my opinion. Um, there is no effort to take over the state legislature. There is no effort to do the groundwork. We come out every 4 years trying to flip the governor's seat, or we come out every 4 years trying to produce a president. And I just don't know that that's
That's real.
efficient.
Can we, Ryan Nave? Ryan Nave. Where was Stacey Abrams this past election season?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, but I do want us to keep in mind that, like, a lot of these times that we're, kind of like reminiscing about when Democrats had some modicum of power, even in state legislatures, these were some conservative ass Democrats.
Yes,
You
they
know, I
were.
mean, like,
Yes, yes.
people talk about Barack Obama's like supermajority that he had in the Senate. Well, like, one of them was Robert Byrd,
Yes,
and it's just like, what is Robert Byrd going to do with Barack Obama's legislative agenda? And so the Mississippi legislature, Republicans gained control of the Mississippi legislature in 2011. First
yep.
time since Reconstruction. Immediately, a dozen Democrats changed their party affiliation.
That's a real thing.
So,
That's a real thing.
so like,
That's right.
how were they? And so they were Democrats, but like, how were they voting? In
Yeah.
the years
Well,
before that.
there were a couple of were they San
For sure.
Francisco values? No, but there were a couple of things that you could reliably count on conservative Democrats to be with you, and that was support for public education,
Right.
and that is support for the labor movement, the organized labor movement, in a real and
For
like
workers. Yeah.
support for
That's
workers.
right.
Right. That's right. That's a very good distinction. You don't get that anymore. But I will tell you, anecdote from the road. I remember when I first went to lobby in Mississippi in 2011. And I used to look at all these black caucuses and I would say, you guys are the majority of your caucus. Whether you're in the majority or the minority, you guys are the majority of the Democratic caucus. Why is every minority leader or majority leader not always a black member? And they would say in Alabama, in Mississippi, in Georgia, they would say, because if we flexed our power, the white dudes would become Republicans the next day.
The next day.
I was like, holy shit,
Yeah.
I've never imagined such a thought. But it was just like, yeah, because if we did, they would flip. And I mean, they would become Republicans the next day. And that's what you saw happened in Mississippi, Ryan.
Yeah.
Like on your watch. That's crazy, dude.
Yeah. I mean, like, they couldn't get a meeting with the speaker. And that has since changed. I mean, and there's so few white Democrats left
Yeah.
in Mississippi and Alabama that calculus doesn't really matter. And I think that they are trying to find places where they can build consensus. But it's kind of like the old joke about like, hey, we need a white boy with us to go talk to the speaker. Because if it's just us, like we're not getting a foot in the door. Yeah.
Iva Williams, on this weekend, the Democratic National Committee elected and announced its new officers for the next 4 years. Two questions for you. Did you know that, and do you care?
Ne- I knew that. Never heard of the dude they elected chairman.
Yeah.
And yes, I did care. And here again, I I thrive for that competition. I mean, I'm, you know, going back to the point, a Alabama Democrat is basically a Republican. When you look at a national values,
Yeah.
if you were to take the temperature that way. But um, this individual, I don't remember his name, but I had never heard of him. That's not to
Ken
say
Martin.
that I'm keeping up.
Ken Martin is your
But
new Democratic Party.
he did not inspire. Um, he didn't come across as an inspirational figure for me, and I think that that is going to be, or I thought that would be key in that position if there was going to be some real challenge come midterms. And so, that's the only light that I've looked at it in. Now, somebody might come right behind me and say, "Oh no, this guy is such, 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 such." Well, I consider myself the average voter, right? When you look at age,
Yeah.
sex, black male, I'm that typical guy, right? And if you can't give me any reason whatsoever to be excited with the chairman of the party, how is that going to look at midterms? That's just, here again, my opinion.
Yeah. Ryan Nave, did you know? Do you care? The Democratic Party elected new officers in leadership for the next 4 years. Were you aware? Do you care?
I mean, I was aware. Jamie Harrison was a friend of Reckon,
Yeah.
did the Reckon interview. I thought he was a really interesting choice for chairman at the time. Um, I have no idea who's on the bench for the DNC or the RNC. So, Ken Martin could have been a rock star in Democratic politics. I probably wouldn't have known. I actually don't know if that's what you want out of your party chairman. I mean, I think what I hear about Ken Martin is just that he's kind of a quiet workhorse. He feels like he has a little bit of a Tim Walz vibe, you know.
Yeah. 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 A
Um,
little bit.
and I also kind of get the sense that like maybe there was a thought in that room around what we were just talking about, and it's just like I don't think Kim Martin has said anything that like Kamala Harris didn't run on or Tim Walz didn't run on. It's just like, oh, if we just like put it in the body of a mild mannered white man,
Right.
Yeah.
right? Like maybe people will be like, oh man, like Democrats are really starting to shake shit up, but they not, right? It's
That's
just
right.
like, there's still this like lingering sort of like love affair, nostalgia like around Bernie Sanders with like the Bernie Bros, and like he might go after billionaires like a little harder. He might go after the state of Israel a little harder, but like Bernie Sanders, like policy wise, like ain't really saying nothing that like isn't kind of a mainstream Democratic position. But I think in some ways, like some of these southern cities that have been like, maybe we should give the white mayor a chance again. If you look at like Memphis or even Detroit, Nashville
Yep.
has a white mayor now. There's conversation like, can there be a white mayor in Jackson? And they're just like, oh, maybe it is the case that the American electorate will not accept um, a woman of color, particularly a black woman. So if we throw some white meat
Yeah.
to the
To
dogs, like
toss it out there. Well,
maybe we'll get a different result in the
it very
midterms.
much feels like that, like a big part of the Trump, his nominees, his people around him are like, order. We are restoring order, right? Like, forget the irony of those being the guys who insurrectioned on that day, right? But like, it very much feels like the cishet white male is restoring order and placing his stamp back in the middle of this thing's chest. and that is by no means limited to the Republican Party, right? You see a lot of your urban mayors in trouble from not necessarily the left or the right, but from whiteness, right? Just from white executive authority returning. You know what I mean? And that is not only is it not limited to the Democratic Party or Republican Party, it's not limited to politics, right? We're seeing what corporations are doing with objectively rolling back all this DEI stuff. But let me get into two real media questions for both of you. Um, Ryan, I want your perspective from inside the room of the people who cover government officials. We saw that at the Pentagon, the press corps was shaken up, and as well as the White House press room, they're shaking up the actual credentialing process of what outlets get to come in and ask questions of our government leaders, not only at the Pentagon, but also at the White House, and really probably across every executive administration department. And we're seeing some of the organizations who are having credentials pulled and deplatformed, these legacy media. So I think NBC News, Washington Post, New York Times, Politico have had credentials either reduced or diminished or entirely pulled. And now we have seen credentials issued to One America News and Breitbart and these just extraordinarily white right wing outlets under the kind of, we're letting new people in and new voices be heard. What does that really mean for like the practical machinations of what Americans will see in front of them in terms of the objective ways that we find out what's happening in government these days?
I think that remains to be seen. But I'll tell you a story about Mississippi. So, like the knock on Mississippi and Alabama is, we're like stuck 70 years in the past. I always make the argument that no, actually, Mississippi and Alabama are the canary in the coal mine. Um, the rest of the country will look like Mississippi in 10 years, and we'll be doing Mississippi in 10 years, doing Mississippi things in 10 years. So in Mississippi, there was always this kind of tension around the press room in the Capitol. It occupies kind of prime real estate, overlooks the rotunda. Um, you know, Again, Republicans have a supermajority in the House and Senate. Uh, you know, it's always a tenuous situation. And so a few years back, a couple of like very decidedly politically conservative organizations like stood up news organizations and demanded space in the Capitol press room. Right? None of us liked it. You know, we tried to raise as much hell as we could, but we knew that like if we fought too hard, we could lose that space. And it's very important to have a dedicated space close to the people that you're covering. Um, it could change the nature of the relationship with sources. And I don't think any reporter in Mississippi like started going soft, but like you think twice before you hit send on certain emails or ask
Yeah.
certain questions because you're thinking about the ripple effects for all the rest of your colleagues and ultimately how those ripple effects like will affect like the ability to produce um, original journalism that is important for citizens. And so like that's the scam, right?
Yeah.
It's really so it is providing a platform to these folks who are already friendly to the organization, but it's also just intended to invoke a little bit of fear in reporters who really see their jobs as calling strikes and balls, who are not partisan at all, despite what folks on any side think, and just make them a little bit more frightful about what happens if they cross the wrong person. Um, and so I don't know how that's going to play out, but I think that like we're going to get more like softball bullshit coverage from these organizations of the administration. There will be less you know, thorough adversarial reporting from the press corps. Um, but in some ways, like I'll say this because like I'm not in journalism right now. Just like the fire hose of shit that they're all trying to drink from, in some ways, like none of that matters because we just can't keep up, even under the best of circumstances. And that's just the scariest thing to me.
Iva, you
I
have kind
think
of become the
I think
face.
that
Go ahead.
what I wanted to say there was I thought you made a really good point there, Ryan. I was not aware that they had done that in the Mississippi legislature, but it just strengthens the point that I was going to make, and that is for a podcaster, for the little guy like me, I like to see that move. I like to see that the quote unquote legacy guys aren't the only ones getting those credentials. Now, here's where the problem lies. As I do that on the local level, and I say this with, no more sense of power than anyone else could gather or garner. And that is, if they're not straight with me, if they're not direct with me, if they're not honest with me, there can be real and immediate um, reaction from me reporting the information, local people getting involved. There is a sense of honesty that has to prevail.
Hmm.
That does not, and that's not the case when it comes to this White House briefing room. If anyone gets in that seat with any level of power who can change the narrative and not agree with this administration, I don't see them getting back in that seat the following day, the following week. So overall, I like the direction that it's going because people do consume their news very differently than our fathers and our forefathers. But at the same time, there's a sense of, you know, where the trusting your source. I don't think that changes very much in just changing who sits in that seat in this White House.
Like I think that obviously we've had biased networks and networks with various slants for a long time, and adults are aware of that. But what is the practical implications on democracy for removing unfavorable or at least perceivedly unfavorable outlets and installing, the objectively, you know, pro Trump outlets like that? I feel like that scares me more, particularly when you're seeing the extreme. Like today, we're talking about closing the Department of Education, and apparently that executive order is, being written as we speak and spell
Right.
checked, right? So like,
I don't know about that.
well, I mean that's what CNN's reporting that they're the reviewing the order as we speak to close that. USAID is being shut down, right? This is what we're being told. And so, if you are taking out the CNNs, and not that CNN is the journalistic standard, but if you're taking out the quote unquote objective news outlets who are going to ask questions about that, about what are the limitations of Doge's power, what is Elon Musk's real role, and you're replacing them with One America News, right? Like, I feel like this is extinction. Like, this is very, very, very scary stuff in a way that I'm not sure uh, we're all prepared for, right?
Yeah, I do want to pick up on what Ava said because I actually agree with the democratization of government information that way. And like, I, I actually think it started with the Obama administration, where it's just like you didn't have to have the secret, White House press, email to get, regular press briefings. Like anybody could sign up to get those emails, and so like whether or not you're just like a retiree sitting in your basement or you're a journalist, like you can get communications from the White House. I actually didn't have a problem when they opened the Democratic National Convention to other types of content creators. But that was like an expansion of the space, and so I think we'd be having a different conversation if it was like, okay, we want to bring in more voices, so we're actually going to like make the press room bigger.
Right.
This is a political process, right? They're obviously picking and choosing, and I would even draw a distinction, not so much along the lines of like who is objective and who isn't. I would also draw lines around who is resourced and who isn't,
Hmm.
right? Because, you know, as the head of a news organization, like before we hit publish on a story, yeah, like I'm worried if the, like I want to know if the facts are true, whatever. But I also want to know if somebody go sue me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And a lawsuit can put my newsroom, that's not what happened. A lawsuit can put my newsroom out of business
Mm-hmm.
and cost my entire staff their jobs, right? And so when people are like, what's, like what makes a journalist and like these questions, I was like, can somebody lose their job over like something being wrong or like something being defamatory? Um, and organizations like CNN are resourced in a way to combat that and to protect their journalists in a way that, like the Joe Rogan podcast, which has like half a dozen producers, like is actually not that well resourced, right? So like, who gives a shit if they get something wrong or like publish something defamatory? Like maybe you can go after Spotify, maybe not. Um, and so I think that's also driving some of those decisions, right? It's just like, oh, if we want to pick on these people, they actually have the money to fight back.
Right. Right.
I think it's interesting as I think back to the first time I heard President Donald John Trump say fake news. Like, did we think we'd end up here? You know what I mean? It's like, okay, going back to what you just said earlier, Don. We're used to slant. We're used to a certain amount of spin, right? You know what station you're watching or listening to because of how it's presented, right? But in the past, it was all factual, right? At least it was factual. These days, in this administration, looks for whomever wants to cover their news favorably. And that is a dangerous, dangerous space to be in.
So I've long since heard that journalistic bias is not necessarily in your opinion on what you report or the slant, but simply found in what you're reporting. And so I wanted to run through. I mean, I don't do much of a topical show, but some hot topics in the news today are, of course, USAID shutting. I'm just here in DC, right? So the basic
Right.
tariffs on Mexico and China. Mexico and Canada. I think he paused them for at least 30 days, right, to see if they'll meet some demands. And of course, at the end of 30 days, the demands will have been met, and they'll treat us well now, whatever that means, right? We're talking tariffs. We're talking Department of Education shutting down. We're talking USAID shutting down. And if you think about journalistic bias in the context of what it is that people are choosing to report, so just have that in mind. And I'm going to run down the headlines on FoxNews.com, right? So Fox News headlines right now. The world is talking about USAID, Department of Ed shutting down, tariffs, right? Fox News, President Trump warns he's left instructions in case Iran carries out assassination. I don't know assassination of who or what. Trump and Netanyahu currently holding a press conference. Trump and Netanyahu have historic opportunity to promote Mideast peace. LAPD union frustrated as no arrests made after officers are injured during anti-ICE protests. Ah, Jesus. Officials announced somber update and recovery operation after, mid-air deadline inclusion. Doge senator fires back at Dems' hysterical response to Elon Musk. Nation's private employer eliminating hundreds of jobs. And Jon Stewart shreds Schumer for avocado stunt, whatever that means, right? Like, there are 10 billionaires 5 miles from me right now reforming American government, and you do not see that currently represented on the network that has 50% of American eyeballs right now talking news.
Yeah.
We are closing the Department of Education as of today. Whether or not it happens, of course, I don't see that currently represented. My point here is we are not debating over angles or nuances of an event. We are not aware of these events happening. We are not reading, we're not talking about the same events, even, right? Let alone debating the pros and cons of these various events. How do we have a conversation with not only conservatives, but anybody, if we're not being fed the same stories to even discuss? And I have to imagine that Breitbart and One American News and all the organizations, the New York Post, right? Not the Times, the Post, and all the organizations that are now front and center in the Trump White House and these administration press rooms, I can't imagine that their universe of headlines looks a whole lot different than what we just heard from Fox News. That worries me, Iva.
Well, I always gauge things like this. Um, would you be uh, enraged if your guy did it, right? So what if Biden had Bill Gates or Warren Buffett in his White House, right? Would people be all enraged about that, right? And bear with me here. I'm gonna come back home with it. Um, I'm not a fan of the idea, but I'm also not going to shoot it down just because I don't like the guy that came up with the idea, right? So when it comes to conversations, are we even having the same conversations? I think that as it relates to slant, right? I think we don't have as much of a problem with slant these days as illustrated by that as we do with what you just brought up, which is covering the news at all. I mean, like the fact that Fox is not talking about the possibility of the Department of Education shutting down, the fact that that's not on their lips, they're not having a conversation about it at all. That bothers me, right? Now, if there was a difference in how they're talking about Elon Musk, that's just what we're used to, right? One side is going to be all for it, and the other side is going to be all against it. But like to your point, we're having a problem now admitting and talking about what should be in the news. And I don't really know that that's going to change. I look at people when you talk to your neighbor, they would rather be right than correct.
Oh, for
And
sure.
I think that is the same with the electorate, right? We're not really looking for the truth so much as we're looking for the points that support our point of view.
Ryan, what would happen if.
This is my shit, by the way. So
Yes.
I may go on a tirade.
No, please, please. And I agree with you, Iva. To the fullest, I agree with you. But I'm wondering, Ryan, give me the practical reality of what happens if Barack Obama has a black African, by the way, Elon Musk is South African. If he has a black African billionaire with him throughout the campaign. Everyone knows he spent $270 million on the campaign. The billionaire spent $44 billion to compromise a popular cyber organizing asset in Twitter. Let's just imagine this is a black African billionaire, right? I don't want to say any actual black billionaires' real names, but a black Senti billionaire spends $270 million, African, spends $270 million on the campaign, buys the major social media platform, and Obama replaces the New York Times with the final call and has said black African billionaire running around talking about closing the Department of Education and has started a new company named after his crypto coin. Like, what happens in the universe that Barack Obama does any of that? Any of that? What is the practical ramifications of what happens in the American power structure the next day?
Practically speaking, Barack Obama's black ass pastor from Chicago had to be disavowed.
There it is. There it is.
And,
There it
and
is.
they only hung out once a week.
And he
They,
didn't hang out once a week. Barack wasn't in
yeah,
the pews every week. He was there a couple
exactly.
times.
At most. So there is no universe in which that could happen. But I mean, I think like in some ways this is a little bit of a culmination and like the natural result of that trope that we loved in like fucking 80s movies about like running government like a like a businessman. I love Dave.
Yeah.
Like that's like it was a seminal film for me, and like how I fell in love with politics in a lot of ways, and it was just like I'm gonna run government like my car dealership. That shit not like it doesn't
That's
work,
how it
right?
works. That's how it works, right?
And that's what's happening now, right? But I do want to come back to the media question because I can't believe it's going to come out of my mouth, but in fairness to Fox News, it is a business.
It is a business. MSNBC is a business.
MSNBC is a business, right? And so, like, they are creating a product that their customer wants. And if they created a product that their customer didn't want, we call that malpractice, right? And so, on some level, like, I understand Fox. Like, Fox doesn't have a responsibility to, paint as close to a picture of the world like as it is, right? Like it's selling burgers to people who want burgers.
Yeah.
That's
Um,
right.
and
But then it's
so
no
I
longer
do
news.
this.
But that's fine if they admit that that's not news. That's a burger stand. That's a political burger stand.
It says you.
Sure,
You're the
sure.
one that says they have to declare that. Where is
But
that written?
and also like they have a First Amendment right to call themselves news. Like McDonald's can call itself news if it wants to. Until there's litigation. And so I do this exercise a couple times a year where like I watch 5 minutes of Fox News in the morning. And the political stuff aside, the stories on Fox News are like he's a retired veteran who gives eyeglasses to police former police service dogs, and like that's what they're being fed, right?
Yeah.
And so like when we're talking about what's going on in the world, to your point, to Iva's point, like they literally do not know because they never see it. There are tens of millions of people who will never know what they're trying to do to the
But I
Department
get
of
okay.
Education.
Okay, so
Bec-
let's accept that. Right? Let's hold
but
that
the
thought.
reason they're not getting it is because they don't want it. I mean, like they're
Yeah.
older, whiter. A lot of their kids probably like didn't even go to public schools, or they went to the public schools in affluent areas, and so like they don't have the same kind of investment in the future of the Department of Education as low income, working class,
No, man.
communities of color, and so like that's why Fox News isn't reporting on it.
I would love to know
I'm not
These
saying that
Democrats.
they shouldn't.
No, but I would love to. I mean, everybody watching Fox News ain't rich. They got too many people for them to all be middle class and upper middle
Oh,
class.
absolutely.
You got some poor white folks whose public schools and rural health centers will be fundamentally decimated by the destruction of the Department of Education.
They're not watching
Like,
Fox News. They're watching clips on Facebook.